All right, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whatever time it is, wherever you are. Welcome once more to another video podcast of Alexandra Mayers Live. It's about 3:49 a.m. over here on the East Coast, which is a little bit of an odd hour for me, but we're living in odd times, so sometimes an odd hour is appropriate for an odd person in an odd time in an odd location. Anyways, I hope all of you are having a nice evening or morning wherever you are. Tonight we are going to go ahead and do another reading and commentary of the autobiography from Todd Bridges titled Killing Willis, because I already went through chapters 1 and chapter 4 in a previous podcast, but I feel the need to backtrack to chapter 2 when he was a little boy and he played a role on Little House on the Prairie, which was a pioneer series produced by Michael Landon. And in that particular scene, he says something very poignant in regards to racism and the element of white privilege and what individuals of color in America go through, and how oftentimes people who are not of color are unable to completely grasp how difficult society can be for people of color. So, anyways, because of that occurrence, I thought to myself, you know what? I think I need to backtrack and go over chapter 2 from that book and provide some commentary on it. So I will. Just give me a moment while I find chapter 2 over here. And remember, you can always pick up his book for digital download through Amazon.com. And hey, Carrie Matthews, how are you doing? Thanks for joining. So I don't know if I'm going to read the entire chapter 2, but I'm at least going to read a bit of it and just share my thoughts as I go through it. All right, it's titled, I Want to Be Just Like Him When I Grow Up. When I was a kid, the thing that scared me the most wasn't sharks or zombies. It was the sound of the garage door opening. We lived in San Francisco in one of the tri-level houses that were very common there. On a typical school night, my brother Jimmy, my sister Verda, and I would be playing down in the finished basement, which was set up like a family room, with couches and a television. Or we'd be upstairs by the fireplace in the living room, listening to my mom singing. My favorite song was always Stormy Weather. No matter what we were doing, we'd always be laughing and have a great time being together the way families were supposed to be. And next time I do one of these readings. All right. And then we heard the familiar noise of the garage door jerking open, and the fun was over. What came next happened so many times that it's hard to remember one bad night from another, but they all went something like this. My mom scrambled to get everything together. She straightened our clothes and fixed our hair, making sure all of us kids looked very presentable. We helped her put away the Monopoly board and any toys we had pulled out after school. By tidying up around us, she tried to make it seem like we weren't doing anything wrong, which of course we weren't. But I felt like I'd been bad anyhow. I had a sick, worried feeling in my stomach, like when something scary happened on TV. I looked back and forth between my mom, who was fussing over her own hair now, and the door that led from the garage into the house. The car engine shut off. There was a moment of silence, and then the door slammed shut. The panic rose from my stomach into my chest. A set of keys jingled. The smoke from a burning cigarette drifted under the door. I looked at Jimmy and Verda. They were older, but they seemed scared too. My mom came over and stood by us. I was the baby of the family, and she rested her hand on my shoulder to comfort me. but there was nothing any of us could do to make it better. My dad, James Bridges, was home. Maybe this time it would be different. Maybe he'd kiss my mom and ask my brother and me if we wanted to go throw the football around in the yard. Hope would flicker up beneath the fear inside me. He was my dad, and I loved him. He swung the door open and slammed it behind him. Everything he did was louder and more forceful than it needed to be. He had stopped at the bar after work, and he was drunk. A compact man with a mustache. He didn't care much for his appearance, but he cared about being respected, and he always felt like I needed to be schooled in that area. He glared at us and then got up close enough to me that I could smell the booze and cigarettes on his breath. "Why didn't you do your damn chores like I asked you to, Todd?" he said, grabbing my arm and yanking me away from my mom. Ugh. Well, see, this right here explains a lot about Todd Bridges. His father was abusive to him. Now, whether his father actually singled him out routinely or not, I would say would be a little bit questionable, because he is very central focused as an individual, from what I've observed, at least, and from what many people have observed. But regardless, when you hear these stories and gossip about him basically paralleling this behavior with women that he's supposedly dated, or allegedly paralleling this behavior, you see where he got it from. He's just mirroring a situation from his past, which is sad. Any sort of psychological abuse or physical abuse against a child is a bad thing, but especially when the child is someone who's, artistically very sensitive, like Todd Bridges would be, this would be even worse of a situation. So this explains a lot. I just wanted to mention that. All right. He talked fast and ran his words together, especially when he was drunk. He was always drunk, so I could never understand what he was saying, and that just made him even madder. "Ain't you gonna answer me, boy?" he said. "I'll teach you some respect." And then whap, he slapped me on the back of my head. I hated that. Not only being hit, but how unfair it was that he punished me when I hadn't even done anything wrong. And that's what actually made him a perfectionist, and probably an incredibly good actor, even though it was abusive. This actually reminds me a lot of the situation that the Jackson kids, Michael Jackson and Janet Jackson, went through when it came to their father. And they all came up around the same time. But, it wasn't, kids nowadays, they just don't get it. But even when I was a kid, it was okay to spank your kid. Nowadays, it's considered abuse. But did it make people more driven? Is a little bit of abuse possibly good for you? Does it draw out the genius? See, this is why I don't have kids. I hated being a kid. All right. He slapped me on the back of my head. I hated that. Not only being hit, but how unfair it was. He punished me when I hadn't even done anything wrong. "Stop it, James. You haven't even been in this room," my mom said. "Shut up, woman," my dad said, looking like he might slap her too, and he probably did sometimes. "Let me heat up some dinner for you, James," my mom said. Ugh, the mom should have poisoned him in his sleep. If he because it was hard to get a divorce back then. And if this man was this abusive, I mean, maybe she loved him. I haven't gotten that far in the book yet because I'm only reading this book when I come on here to do Alexandra Mayers live. But I mean, these women who stay with these men who abuse these children, that's part of why the world has reached a certain state that it has. It's been too much abuse over the years, too much abuse. She moved to stand between my dad and us and nodded for us to go to our rooms, where we'd be out of his sight. So if he got mad at anybody, it would be her. I'm not hungry, my dad said. From that moment on, the rest of the night was ruined. Even if he just sat in his recliner, drinking brandy and smoking cigarettes while he watched television, he found a way to make the rest of us miserable. No matter how good we were, or how hard we tried to make him happy, it was never good enough. And that's affected this man to this day. Never feeling good enough. Never good enough. Even though he has probably been good enough at some, phases of his life, still, it was that dad who really messed everything up. Horrible. That was probably my first experience of acting. Pretending to be the perfect kid who was a part of the perfect family when my dad walked in the door every night. What's funny about our need to perform for my dad is that everything pretty much was perfect when I was growing up, except for him. Even though my dad drank a lot, he always worked hard. And we were middle class in the late 1960s, at a time that was very difficult. That was a very difficult thing for a black family to be. So let's cut right there. The dad was probably projecting his anger upon his family that he was actually the recipient of at whatever it was that he was doing for a living. At his job, even if nobody called him the N-word to his face, I'm sure that he was dealing with people who were his superiors, who were not people of color, who were constantly giving him a hard time because they could get away with it. And you know how people can be. So that was probably a ton for the dad to shoulder at that time. Not that that's an excuse to abuse your wife and kids, but that's why I kind of question whether or not assimilation was really the best thing in America at that particular time. In other words, desegregating workplaces, schools, and whatnot, because sure, status-wise, it seemed like a good thing because that's what the powers that be were really pushing and promoting at that time. But when it came to the abuse and the stress that the generation who were the offspring of the individuals who were a part of the desegregation of America at that time, it was a lot to deal with. I mean, when I really think about it, I'm one of those people who is the offspring of individuals who were forerunners of desegregating colleges and whatnot. Both of my parents were some of the first African Americans to attend certain colleges and universities back around this time period. And just when I think about the stress that they went to, I think a lot of the anxiety that they felt, they definitely projected upon me growing up. And I did actually grow up with some similar issues to not as extreme as Todd Bridges, but those of you who follow me, you can take a look at my life and see what I've been up to. And if you're a psychologist, I'm sure that you can deduct why I chose to make certain choices that I did in life. But it's all a part of being human. That's all. All right. Even though my dad drank a lot, he always worked hard, and we were middle class in the late 60s at a time when that was a very difficult thing for a black family to be. My dad was proud of this fact. He had been forced to start working at 15 years old to help support his own family, and it gave him satisfaction to know that we were better off than his family had been. My family was poor in the early years when my brother James Jr., Jimmy, and my sister Verda were born, but my mom had done well in college and gotten a job in a bank after she graduated, and my dad was a manager at a local Mayfair department store before becoming a longshoreman. And because they both believed in working hard, and my mom was really good with money, the family was doing all right by the time I came along on May 27th, 1965. And even though there weren't many other middle class black families in our neighborhood, everyone got along really well. San Francisco was such a melting pot, even back in the late 1960s. I didn't know what racism was until we moved to Los Angeles. That's interesting, isn't it? I didn't know that San Francisco was that much of a melting pot back then. Our best friends were white, black, Latino, and East Indian. When my mom had parties, they were always very well mixed, and everyone had a good time together, no matter what color their skin. We had a great life in San Francisco. From a very young age, my favorite thing was to take apart anything and everything I could get my hands on. I just loved breaking things into pieces, trying to figure out how they worked, and then seeing if I could put them back together. The Christmas I was 4 years old, my mom and dad bought me a gas-powered airplane that could really fly. They tried to assemble it on Christmas Eve, so it would be waiting as a surprise for me in the morning, but they couldn't figure out how to get it put together. They finally had to give up and go to bed. The next morning, I got up before they did, and I put that airplane together without the instructions or anything. Once I had it assembled, I took it out behind our house. We called that whole area the Rocky Mountains because it was covered with these little pieces of broken rock. I was happy as could be flying my new airplane all around the backyard with Jimmy and Verda. The sound of the engine finally woke my parents. They came running outside because they didn't know what they were hearing. When they saw me flying that plane, they couldn't believe it. I was afraid I was going to get in trouble for putting the gas in by myself, because I knew I was supposed to wait for them to do stuff like that. But they were so impressed with me that they couldn't even be that mad. Pretty soon after that, they decided they would only give me toys that had to be assembled. They had already stopped buying me anything mechanical because I would just tear it apart and use the pieces for something else. Wow, so he was a really smart kid. Very smart. I wonder if he's genius level. He probably is, because if he was an actor and he had to memorize those lines at such a young age, he probably had a photographic memory too. It almost makes me think that Todd Bridges' talent might have been wasted in Hollywood. He did pave the way for a lot of black actors and actresses, which is a good thing, I suppose. But it makes me wonder what else he could have accomplished in life if he hadn't been locked into that Hollywood system. I guess it wouldn't be too late for him, because how old would he be now? Maybe, I guess he's in his 50s now. I wonder if he has a college degree of any sort. He would probably be a really good engineer. When my dad wasn't home, the rest of the family loved to hang out at the house together. One of our favorite things to do was listen to my mom sing. She was also a fantastic artist, and she used to draw pictures of all of us kids. She had grown up Oh, my connection went down again. But anyway, I was saying for a black woman at that time to be able to get the job that she did, where did he say that she worked? Let's see. I forgot. She worked at a bank. That means that she likely would have been really good with numbers. Wow. So she was exceptional, but really the only way that she could continue to be a part of traditional society was to be in a traditional family sort of dynamic. So she got to excel, but at the same time, she was trapped in this damn abusive relationship. Ugh, it makes me sick. That's why I consider marriage to be slavery. Let's see what y'all are talking about in the weird rules that really hold us back as people. I'm not even, I think that there does need to be a license to have children because too many people are abusive to kids. And then that makes it to where kids can't, always flourish to their full potential. Like, imagine if this Todd Bridges guy had grown up in an environment that hadn't been abusive, to where someone could have recognized his talents, and to where racism wasn't a thing, to where he could have been properly cultivated. Maybe he's another Nikolai Tesla and we don't even know it. But because of racism, because of the abuse that he dealt with, here he is today running around with hookers, allegedly on drugs, and only God knows what else. That's a shame. All right, I'm not going to read through the whole chapter of this. It just goes on and it talks about how abusive his father was, how the neighborhood kids looked up to his mom. He had big dreams as a kid. Okay. In many ways, I was just a normal kid who happened to have a complicated home life. But my dreams were a lot bigger than that. Even at 5 years old, I knew I was going to be a star. All I had to do was find a vehicle to get me there. That came through my mother. Okay, so the mom, she did recognize her son was super smart and could probably be a good actor. After college, she studied acting at American Conservative Theater, which was a big acting school in San Francisco. When my mom graduated from ACT, one of her teachers encouraged her to get an agent, and so she did. Okay, so his mom got into acting. I didn't know that. That's interesting. Even though there weren't a lot of production companies in San Francisco, she landed 3 or 4 commercials right away, and she had to quit her job at the bank. Good for her. I wonder if she was really pretty. I'm going to find some pictures of her because I'm curious to see what his mom looked like. Jimmy Verda and I loved going to mom's performances. Jimmy Verda and I loved going to mom's performances. Seeing her on stage and on television was really cool. It made acting seem like something I could do. I wonder though how his dad took it. Did he get jealous? I'm going to skip ahead a bit to see if how the dad dealt with it. Let's see. Well, she was making money, so he probably didn't care. My mom was an acting teacher as well as an actress. She started giving Jimmy and Verda and me acting lessons, and she eventually taught us everything she had learned at ACT. She taught us how to cold read, which meant reading from a script that we hadn't practiced before. That's hard. All right, so he doesn't really say much about the dad yet in here. Let's see. I'm skipping ahead. Oh, here we go. I knew it. I knew it. All right. I was 7 at the time, and I had one line. My mom worked with me, so I'd be ready on the day of the shoot. When it came time in front of the cameras, I actually did better than my mom did. I remembered my line, and she kept messing hers up. In fact, I calmed her down between takes. "Don't worry, Mom," I said. "You can remember. Take your time and just think about the dialogue. Remember what you told us?" Wow, so he coached his own mom. See, and this is also an instance of evolution. Todd was an evolutionary step ahead of his mom, who was already ahead of her time. I wonder if scientists have been studying Todd Bridges all these years, because he is an exemplary example of human evolution, his whole family. Maybe that's why he's been given such a hard time over the years. It's maybe he's like a real life instance of that Jim Carrey movie, The Truman Show. Something to think about. Finally, we nailed all our parts. I got to deliver my line. That was a long time ago now, and I've delivered thousands of lines since then, but my mom and I remember it being something like this. "Mom, what are you going to do with the Jell-O?" I had this squeaky, high-pitched voice back then, and everyone just thought that was the cutest thing ever. After that, we did a Tide commercial as a family too. And then my first big commercial was a United Airlines ad starring Carl Weathers and featuring their old jingle, "Fly the Friendly Skies." My mom was in that one too, and Carl played my dad. That was the third or fourth commercial in which Carl had been cast as my mom's husband. My dad did not like that one bit. He was very jealous of any successful black man, and he dealt with it like he did everything else, by being drunk and mean. Oh! You know, that is interesting that the studios did keep casting the same actor as his mother's on-stage husband. I'll bet you the studios had the agenda of breaking that family apart and reassembling the family with this particular male actor, if he wasn't already in a relationship. Because back then, studios did that because they looked at the actors that they employed basically as their property. Yeah. I wonder if his mom ever thought about writing a book, because that's the book I would want to read, because she would have had one hell of a life. I did my voice to I did my best I did my voice to I did my best to avoid his abuse, but there was no escaping it completely. It started to affect me outside of the house too. After my dad hit my mom, I always seemed to get into a fight or get in trouble at school. That's because he wanted to beat the shit out of his dad. I was the smallest kid growing up, so other kids thought they could pick on me. What they couldn't see was that I was also one of the toughest kids. I had all of this anger toward my dad that was banging around inside me, and it didn't take much for it to rear up. If someone started something with me, I went nuts. Ah. Well, this chapter actually explains a lot about Bridges. I'll just read the final paragraph. Moving to Los Angeles was definitely an adjustment in a lot of ways, but it could have been a lot worse. My career took off as soon as we got settled, and that meant I didn't have to go to the regular elementary school anymore, because he kept getting in fights and stuff. And so I didn't get involved in as many fights I would have otherwise. I honestly don't know how long I would have lasted in school if I had gone full time. As much as I have reason to look back and regret aspects of my life, I feel very lucky that I had the opportunities that I did. In many ways, my childhood dreams really saved my life. So, get this guy's book. It's really good. He touches a lot on bullying. In chapter 2, he touches a lot on how he coped with abuse at home. And this chapter specifically does really get into just the elements of racism and whatnot he was going through at that time. They even tried to put him on Ritalin. I'm not going to read this whole part, but I'm just going to go back and touch on it. I was always very talkative and hyper, sort of like I am now. Of course, now it's a good thing because running my mouth earns me a good living, but back then it was a problem because my teachers wanted me to be quiet in class. The school even told my mom they wanted to put me on Ritalin. At first, she considered it because she was worried about the behavioral problems I was having at school. And isn't it interesting? Maybe she came to this conclusion, but it was kind of her fault that he was having behavioral problems because she stayed in an abusive marriage. Now, again, divorce wasn't a big thing at the time, but I'm just going to say it. Considering how intelligent the mother was and how good of an actress she was, what stopped her from getting rid of her husband permanently? I think she would have been able to concoct a plan and play it off through her acting skills to where nobody would have ever questioned it. Why didn't she do that? Was it love? Was it fear? Was it fear of society, fear of getting caught? Because I think she could have gotten away with it. Maybe in an alternate reality she did. But see, this is why I probably get in trouble myself. Oh, so she didn't put him on Ritalin. I think that's probably for the best because he would have been a completely different person. But yeah, check out this book. I'll do another reading and commentary of this book in the future. Oh, someone in the chat room, they wrote, oh, they tried to medicate him. That might explain his later drug problems. Yeah. Well, he probably developed the drug problems as a means of escapism because he wanted to escape the pain and probably flashbacks of witnessing abuse. And because he wasn't just abused at home, when he got into the Hollywood system, they abused him too. And, since then, he's gotten into relationships that have been psychologically abusive because we all saw what happened with that Melissa Hill thing. I mean, she had me fooled too. He probably gravitated toward her because she embodies a certain gift when it comes to acting, but she's out of her mind too. So anyway, thanks everyone for joining me on this particular podcast of not Monica at Home. I'm thinking about acting, so it took me back in time to my time in acting. Thanks for joining me on another podcast of Alexandra Mayers Live. Who am I? What's going on? Are all actors actually schizophrenic?